What would you do if someone you loved was sealed behind a door you couldn't open? Comment the survival story you want next, and subscribe. Your idea could become a future confession. The linen chute went quiet at about 4:45, and that was the first thing I got wrong, because I was glad about it. I ran the laundry at the Ashgrove Court. Overnights, 11 to 7, 4 nights a week, and a fifth when somebody called off. 210 rooms, a ballroom, a conference wing, and a pool on the second floor that leaked chlorine smell into the east stairwell, no matter what anybody did about it. The laundry sat in the basement under the loading dock. 4 washers, 6 dryers, a folding table long enough to lay a body on, and a chute room off the back where everything the housekeepers pushed down from the upper floors landed in a canvas bin the size of a bathtub. On a normal night, that chute talked all shift. Bundles coming down at 11, at 1, at 3, thumping into the bin like somebody dropping sandbags. When it stopped early, all it usually meant was the third-floor girls had finished their stripping and gone home, and I'd get a clean run at the last 2 loads and be out the door by 5 after 7. So the quiet was fine. What wasn't fine was the bundle that came down at 4:40. I heard it hit, and I went back and pulled it out, and it was heavy the way a wet load is heavy. Sheets, 4 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and a man's brown shoe. Not a pair. 1 shoe, laces still tied, sitting in the middle of the linen like it had been folded in on purpose. I set it on the shelf by the door where we put the stuff people lose in their sheets, phone chargers, earrings, a pair of birdwatching binoculars somebody left in 507, back in April that nobody ever called about. Then I shook the towels out into the sorting bin, and I noticed they were wet, and not shower wet. Heavier than that, and dark in patches, and they smelled like a penny left in your mouth. I ran them anyway. Hot, double alkali, extra bleach, because that's what you do with a soiled load. And because at 4 in the morning, your brain doesn't take a detour. I'd washed worse. You work in a hotel long enough, you wash everything. A nosebleed, a bad night, a wedding party with somebody's cousin who can't hold his liquor. There'd been a wedding in the ballroom that Saturday and a second reception in the atrium on Sunday for a family that had booked the whole 3rd floor. And by Monday night, the 3rd floor had that used-up feeling, ice buckets in the hallway, a shoe in the linen. That's a Tuesday. That's just a Tuesday. I want to be plain about that, because a lot of what came after is me thinking I understood a building I'd only ever understood from the bottom up. My name's Wes Kolar. I was 43 that summer. I'd been at the Ashgrove 11 years, which made me one of the 4 or 5 people who could tell you where anything actually was. Not where the map in the lobby said it was, but where it was. Which service elevator would answer at 3 a.m., and which one would sit on 6 with its doors open pretending it was busy. Which floor's chute door didn't latch unless you pulled it twice. Where the shop kept spare sprinkler heads in a green metal box with a wrench zip-tied to the handle, because the fire inspector made them show him every spring. And Marisol at the front desk kept the paperwork in a binder she complained about. I never went to school for anything. I know linen, I know carts, I know how much hot water it takes to do 300 pounds of towels, and I know how a building sounds when it's running right. At 5:50 that morning, my phone buzzed on the folding table. My dad. He'd typed, "Leaving now. Coffee's made." My truck was at Delph's out on the state route with a bad water pump, going on the 4th day, and my dad had been driving in from Kettle Ridge to get me at the end of my shifts. 22 minutes each way for a man who was 66 years old and had a knee replacement 8 months behind him that still made him take stairs one at a time, sideways, with his hand on the rail. He wouldn't hear about me getting a ride from Marisol. He wouldn't hear about a rental. He'd say, "I'm up anyway," which was true. And then he'd show up 10 minutes early with that dented green thermos he'd carried since he worked county roads. The one with the seam in the paint worn down to metal where his hand went. We weren't close. I want that understood too, because it matters to the rest of it. My mother had died 2 years before, and after that, my dad and I had gotten very polite with each other. We talked about tires, we talked about the price of gravel, and whether the Marsh Fork Bridge was ever going to get fixed. 4 days of him driving me to work and back was the most time we'd spent in a vehicle together since I was in high school. And both of us had been careful with it, the way you're careful carrying something you're not sure is yours. At 6:15, I pulled the last load and started stacking. At 6:20, the house phone in the laundry rang, which almost never happened that hour, and it was Marisol. "Are you still down there?" "Where else?" "Sonia's here," she said. Sonia Alt was our executive housekeeper, 54, 26 years in hotels, and she did not come in before 7 for anything. She came in at 5:30. She's on the phone with the third floor. On the phone with who on the third floor? Room 318 called down at 4-something asking for a manager. And then 322 called. And then nobody's picking up on 3. Marisol was 29, and she'd been the night auditor for 2 years, and she had a way of putting a bad thing in a sentence, like she was reading you a room rate. Also, the county line's busy, not ringing, busy. Busy how? Like 1998 busy. I said I'd come up when I finished the fold. That's what I said. I stacked 12 dozen bath towels, because that's what was in front of me, and because a folded stack is the only thing in my job that ever stays done. By the time I came up the service stairs into the back corridor behind the front desk, it was 6:35, and the lobby had that wrong feeling you get when the light's normal but the sound isn't. Our lobby was a glass box. 2 stories of window on the Pell Street side, a revolving door in the middle and a sliding door on the north end for luggage carts. A porte cochere out front where the shuttle idled. Beautiful in the brochure. Nothing about it was built to be a wall. Sonia was behind the desk with her reading glasses up on her head, and she had the housekeeping radio in one hand and the desk phone in the other. And she was looking at the little monitor with the camera views on it. "3rd floor west," she said without saying good morning. "Tell me what you see." The camera on 3 showed the elevator lobby and about 40 feet of hallway. There was a housekeeping cart parked crooked halfway down, which was wrong at 6:30 because nobody was on the floor yet. And past it, near the ice alcove, a man in a t-shirt was standing with his face about 6 inches from the wall. Not leaning, standing. He didn't move the whole time I watched, and I watched longer than I want to admit. "Somebody's cousin," I said. "From the reception. Drunk. At 6:30 on a Tuesday." "People do." "Hollis went up 20 minutes ago," Sonia said. Hollis Dean was the overnight security guy, 61, walked the property with a flashlight and a clipboard, and knew everybody's kids' names. "He hasn't come back, and he's not answering the radio." That's when my phone buzzed again. "In the garage, level 3. Bring your lunch bag if you left it." The garage was across Pell Street. 5 levels, county-owned. And the hotel had a Skybridge to it on our 4th floor, because when they built the conference wing in the 90s, nobody wanted guests walking across a street in February. The bridge was about 110 feet long. Glass on both sides from knee-height up. A strip of carpet down the middle. A little alcove halfway with 2 chairs, and a table where people took pictures of the courthouse dome. At the hotel end, it opened into a vestibule off the 4th floor west corridor. At the garage end, it opened onto the level 3 deck. Both ends had rolling steel curtains. Most people never saw them because they lived up in boxes above the doorways behind a soffit. We closed them from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. for security, and they came down on their own if the smoke detectors in either vestibule went off. And once a year, a company came out and dropped them, and put them back up, and wrote it in Marisol's binder. Our 4th floor was closed that summer. Rooms 401 through 428, the whole west side, gutted for a refreshed new carpet, new drapes, new bathrooms. The contractor had the guest room doors off their hinges and stacked in 419. And the corridor smoke doors were out too, waiting on replacements that were 3 weeks late. They'd stacked their material in the hall, rolls of carpet pads standing on end like fence posts, boxes of blackout drapery panels, 5-gallon buckets. They'd shut the power off to that wing at the panel and hung a tag on it. And because they ran a fan in there for the smell, they'd been propping the west stairwell door open all week with a rubber wedge, which I'd kicked out twice and Sonia had written up once. So the 4th floor was open, dark, hot as a truck cab, full of material, and connected by 110 feet of glass to a parking garage. I texted my dad back, "Come in the bridge, elevators are slow. I'll meet you." He typed, "Already walking." I have read that message a lot of times. I was still behind the desk when the fire alarm panel in the back office started chiming its trouble tone, and then a second later, the horns went off. Not the full evacuation tone, the 2-stage one we got when a single detector pulled. Marisol turned around to the panel and read the display out loud. "Zone 41, Skybridge vestibule east and 42. She looked up. Both vestibules. Sonia said something I didn't hear because I was already moving. Here's what I found out later, in pieces, from my dad. There was a car burning down on level 2 of the garage, over by the exit gate. Somebody had driven into the gate arm and the concrete pillar past it and left the car running and gotten out and gone away from it. And the smoke came up the ramp the way smoke does in a garage, which is to say it filled the levels above it like water filling a glass. It reached the detector at the garage end of the bridge. And about the same time, the draft carried it through and set off ours. Both curtains released. Both curtains came down. I got to 4 the long way, up the east stairwell, because the guest elevators were doing something stupid and the service car was on 6. 4 flights, maybe 90 seconds. I came out into the east corridor, crossed the elevator lobby, went through the plastic sheeting the contractor had hung. They'd stapled it to a stud frame with a slit in the middle you had to push through with your shoulder, and down the west corridor between the carpet pad rolls and the drape boxes to the bridge vestibule. There's no drama in what I saw. That's the part people don't picture right. There was just a wall where there had never been a wall. A gray steel curtain, floor to header, slats about 2 inches wide, still ticking as it settled. The alarm horns were going, and somewhere behind that curtain my father's voice was saying my name with a question mark on it. The curtain hadn't seated. One of the contractor's carpet pad rolls had been standing right in the track line, and the curtain had come down on it and driven it flat. And the roll was doing what a roll of carpet pad does. It was compressing, and it was fighting back. The bottom bar of the curtain sat about 8 inches off the floor at that end, tilted, resting on that squashed roll of foam. I got down on the carpet and put my face to the gap, and I could see him. His shoes first, then his knees, then he got down too, slowly, the way he had to, one hand on the glass. "Hey," he said, "you okay? There's smoke out that way." He tipped his head toward the garage end. It came down over there too, the whole thing. I heard it come down behind me, and then this one came down in front of me, and I thought, well, that's something. He was breathing hard from getting on the floor. There's a car on fire down there. And there's people out on the deck making a hell of a noise. What kind of noise? Not a good kind. I told him to sit tight. I said it like a man who has an answer. And I did have one. And this is the part I'm going to be careful with. Because I've told it wrong for a long time. Above the opening, there was a soffit, a drywall box the contractor had built around the curtain housing when they redid the ceiling. Behind that box was the hand chain. You pull the chain, you crank the curtain back up. I'd watched the inspection company do it. It's not skilled work. It's a hoist chain and a lot of pulling. The contractor had closed that soffit in with drywall and hadn't cut the access panel yet. I had my box cutter in my back pocket because I always did. I cut a flap, maybe 14 inches, folded it down, and there it was, the chain hanging in a loop, and the release device with its little reset lever, and a cardboard tag on a wire. The fourth floor was empty. It was hot and dark and smelled like new carpet glue, and it was absolutely empty. And the only sound in it was the alarm horn and my father breathing on the other side of a steel curtain. And I stood there with my hand on that chain, and I did not pull it. I've had years to build the reasons, and I can build them fast, so let me just lay them out the way they came at the time. It takes 3 or 4 minutes of hard pulling to raise one of those curtains. The alarm was still an alarm, which meant the release was still calling for closed, which meant I'd have to reset it first, and I wasn't sure I'd reset it right. And if I got it halfway up and it dropped, I'd have taken out the pad roll and sealed him in with no gap at all. There was the smoke on the garage side, and the bridge was the only thing between it and my open, doorless floor full of foam and cardboard. And underneath all of that, the real one, the one I never said to anybody. Through the gap, I could hear the garage deck, and it did not sound like people yelling at a car fire. It sounded like a lot of people making one noise together. And I did not want to open 110 feet of glass tunnel between that and the inside of my building. My dad was on the other side of 8 inches of curtain, in a place with no smoke, behind 2 steel doors, and downstairs there was a lobby made of window and a woman on the radio saying Hollis wasn't answering. I said, "Dad, give me an hour. I've got to get people off the floor down there, and then I'm coming back with somebody to help me pull this." He said, "Go on then," like I'd asked to borrow the truck. I folded the drywall flap back up and taped it with a strip of the contractor's blue tape so it would stay. And I went down the west stairwell. And on the 4th floor landing, I kicked the rubber wedge out from under the door and let it shut behind me. And I heard it latch, and I felt good about that. The next 4 hours are a smear. I can give you the shape of it. The lobby filled up. Not with a mob with about 30 people who'd all decided at the same time that the front desk was where you go when your phone won't call out, and the TV in your room is showing a county map with hatch marks on it. A man from the wedding party wanted his car, and his car was in the garage, and I had to tell him the bridge was down, and the street door to the garage had a crowd around it. 2 of the housekeepers came in for their 7 o'clock, and one of them, Delia, got out of her car in the porte cochere and got back in and drove away. And I don't blame her, and I hope she made it. Sonia took the desk phone and started calling every number in the emergency binder and got a busy signal or a recording on all of them. Marisol got the radio in the back office tuned to the Holbrook station, which was running the same 90-second loop about the county health line and staying where you are. Teddy Nunn, 19, a steward out of the banquet kitchen who'd come in early because he always came in early, propped the loading dock door with a milk crate so he could bring the trash out. And I made him stop. And that's the first order I gave anybody. Around 7:15, a man came through the revolving door bleeding from his forearm, and about 8 people in the lobby decided at once that they wanted to be somewhere with fewer windows. I'm the one who told them where to go. I said the 4th floor west. I said it because the rooms up there had no doors on them and no furniture, and you could put 40 people in that corridor, and because it was away from the glass, and because it was the floor I'd just come down from, and it was empty and quiet, and I'd walked every foot of it 10 minutes earlier. I told them to take the west stairwell, and I told them the wedge for the door was on the landing if they needed to prop it for the ones coming behind. 14 or 15 people went up that stairwell in the next 20 minutes. I held the door for some of them. A man in a blue windbreaker with a hotel pen still in the chest pocket said thanks and asked me if there was water up there, and I said there were sinks in the rooms that still had sinks. His name was Gordon Fisk. He and his wife had come in for the Rennick wedding, and they were supposed to check out at 11. Then the man with the bleeding forearm sat down on the lobby sofa, and about 40 minutes later, he wasn't sitting down anymore. And everything I thought about the shape of that day came apart. I'm not going to lay out that part in detail. There were about 15 seconds of shouting, and a woman went through the sliding door onto Pell Street and didn't come back. And Teddy Nunn hit a man twice with a bell cart, and then stood there, holding the cart, and shaking. And Sonia put her whole arm out in front of me like a mother stopping short at a red light, and said, "Basement. Move them to the basement." We got everybody who was still in that lobby down the back corridor and through the service stair into the basement. And I pulled the dock door chain down and locked it. And Sonia counted heads out loud twice, because that's the kind of thing that keeps her hands from shaking. 14, including me, Sonia, Marisol, Teddy, and 11 guests, one of whom was a retired 4th grade school teacher named Elaine Fisk, who kept asking whether anybody had seen a man in a blue windbreaker, because they'd gotten separated at the elevators. It was 9:40 in the morning. At 10:20, I went back up for my father. I took the east stairwell to 4 and came out into the elevator lobby, and before I got to the plastic sheeting, I stopped because I could hear the west corridor, and it was making sound, not talking, not 14 or 15 scared people asking each other what the county line said. It was a shuffling, close together, no conversation sound. And somebody was hitting a drape box with something over and over at exactly the same speed. I stood behind that plastic for a long time. The slit was right in front of my face, and I could see through it, a warped view down the west corridor toward the vestibule. And there were people standing in it. Some of them were moving down the hall in the slow way a person moves when they're looking for a room number. Some of them weren't moving at all. One of them was in a blue windbreaker, in the doorless doorway of 412, facing into the room. The soffit with the chain in it was 130 feet past them. I went back down. I didn't go to the gap. I sat on the landing between 3 and 4 with my back against the block wall for a while. And then I went down to the basement. And Sonia was in the chute room with a clipboard doing an inventory of every consumable in the building. And she looked up and said, "Can you get to him?" And I said, "The chain's boxed in. Contractor drywalled over the housing. There's no access panel yet." That was the first one. It came out smooth and complete, and she wrote something on her clipboard and moved on to how many cases of bottled water were in dry storage. And I stood there and let it be true. By 3 that afternoon, I'd figured out that the hot side of the 4th floor, the west end, sealed in plastic, no air moving, all that glass got up past 100 degrees in the afternoon, and that the people in it got slow when it did. Slow enough that at 2:40 I went through the slit, walked the north wall behind the stacked pad rolls, and got to the vestibule and got down on the floor at the gap with a bottle of water and a wet bath towel. And my father took them from my hand. He'd already taken his shirt off and hung it on the glass. He'd already worked out that the alcove halfway down was the coolest spot because the courthouse threw shade on it after 2. He had the green thermos on the carpet beside him, empty, and he made me fill it from the water bottle before he'd drink any of it himself, so he'd have something with a lid. "How many people you got down there?" he said. 14. "That's a lot of people." He looked at me through the gap with one eye, the way you look through a mail slot. "You're not coming back up here every hour. You know that." "I'll come when I can." That's a different answer than the one I said. He pushed the empty water bottle back under to me. "Because you don't waste a bottle. There's a woman down on the deck out there, other side of that one. She was calling out yesterday's date this morning, like she was taking attendance." At 6 that evening, the city water pressure dropped. First, the 4th floor sinks went, then the fixtures in the ballroom restrooms. And by 7, all we had running was whatever the building itself was holding, which meant the 2 big storage tanks in the laundry and the house tank, and about 9 cases of bottled water in dry storage. That's mine to know. That's the one thing in that building I knew better than anybody alive. And at 9, when it was dark and the west corridor had gone loud again, Elaine Fisk found the birdwatcher's binoculars on my lost and found shelf, and the 2 of us went up to the 6th floor west stair landing, where there's a window that looks straight down the top of the Skybridge and into its far end. My father had gotten a laundry marker off a housekeeping cart in the vestibule. He'd taped a pillowcase to the inside of the glass at the alcove. It said, in letters a foot high, OK, 2 bottles. Elaine handed me the binoculars and said, quiet and pleasant, the way she probably used to tell a kid he'd spelled something wrong, "You'll tell me if you see Gordon up there, won't you?" I said I would. The binoculars were cheap ones, and the stairwell window had a screen on the outside, so the pillowcase came through in little squares. I looked at it long enough that Elaine took the strap out of my hand and looked for herself. "He's got good letters," she said. "Most men your father's age write like they're mad at the paper." He'd been a school bus driver for the county for 9 years after the road crew. And before that, he'd painted numbers on mailboxes for extra money. And I told her that. And she said that explained it. And we went back downstairs. That was the last easy conversation I had with her. We spent that first night in the laundry because it was the only room in the basement big enough. And because it had the folding tables. 14 people, no windows, 1 battery lantern turned down to its lowest setting, and about 900 pounds of clean linen, which turns out to be the one thing a hotel has too much of. I made beds out of stacked blankets on the concrete. Sonia sent people to the linen shelves in pairs so nobody would be alone in the dark corridor. And by midnight, everybody had a mattress of 6 folded blankets and a stack of towels for a pillow. And the room smelled like laundry sour and chlorine and a lot of people. The emergency generator ran until Thursday morning. It fed the egress lights, the fire pump, and 1 elevator. And none of us knew enough about it to argue with it when it quit. Marisol wrote the time down on the back of a banquet event order because by then she was writing everything down. After that, we had flashlights, 4 battery lanterns from the shop, and a case and a half of votive candles out of the banquet closet that we used maybe a dozen of in 11 days. Because open flame in a building nobody's coming to was a conversation we had once and never had again. Water, I understood. That's my whole job, water and heat and how long it takes to get either one back. We had 2 storage tanks in the laundry, 500 gallons apiece. And I'd been pulling hard on both of them all night doing the wedding's linen, so they were nowhere near full. When the city pressure went, whatever was in the pipes above us came down into the risers and stopped there. I drained what I could into every clean bucket, tub, and ice bin in the building. The bottom of a tank that hasn't been serviced since the previous owners is not something you want to look at. So we drew from the valve and stopped short of the sediment. And I told everybody plainly that when I said stop drawing on tank 2, I meant it. Between the tanks and the cases in dry storage, I figured we had 2, maybe 3 weeks of drinking water for 14 people if nobody was stupid about it. The pool was the other half of it. Second floor, indoors, no exterior windows. 180,000 gallons of chlorinated water that nobody was ever going to drink, and that solved every other problem we had. We flushed with it. We washed with it. Teddy Nunn set up a bucket relay on the east stairs from the pool deck down to the second-floor service restroom, and then down to the basement. And he ran that relay 4 times a day for a week without ever once being asked to. And if I say anything good about that kid, it's that. On Wednesday morning, Sonia put rules on the wall. She wrote them on the back of a banquet floor plan with a laundry marker and taped it next to the chemical cabinet. And they were good rules, and I helped write most of them. Nobody moves alone. Nobody goes above the 3rd floor. Doors stay shut and latched behind you, every time, no exceptions. No lights facing the Pell Street glass after dark. And mine, the linen chute doors, stay closed. I made a small speech about that last one, which I'd give a lot to take back. The chute ran from the 6th floor down to the basement. 1 shaft, a hinged door on every floor with a spring on it, and a latch that dropped when it shut. I told them that shaft was a straw from the top of the building to the room we slept in. Anything you drop in it lands on us. Any sound we make down here goes up it. Any smell goes up it. I said if you find a chute door open, you shut it. And if you can't shut it, you come tell me. Sonia wrote it down. Marisol said, "That's the most words you've said since I met you." And a couple of people laughed, and it was the last time the room laughed at anything for a while. I want to describe the count, because the count is the thing. On Wednesday afternoon, Marisol went up to the 6th floor west landing with the binoculars and looked down into the top of the Skybridge and out at the 4th floor windows across the light well. And she counted shapes. She was doing it to check on my dad. She started counting the other thing because she couldn't help it. She came down and told me 16. 16 on the 4th floor west, which was 15 or so people I had sent up a stairwell, plus somebody. I said, "That's about right." I remember the flatness of my own voice. The heat is what I should have understood first, since I ran a room that made heat for a living. And I didn't understand it until it almost killed me. Wednesday night, I decided to make a crossing at 2 in the morning, because I'd worked nights for 11 years, and nights are when a hotel goes quiet. It is a stupid thing to be confident about, and I was confident about it. I went up the east stair with a headlamp and a plastic bag with 2 bottles of water and a roll of trash liners. And when I came out on 4, the corridor was cool for the first time all week, and the whole floor was awake. They were moving, not fast, but going door to door, into the rooms with no doors, out again, down the hall and back. And one of them came through the plastic sheeting while I was standing 5 feet from it because I had picked the wrong side of the slit to stand on. I got back into the east stairwell and got the doors shut and held the lever up with both hands, and my foot braced on the block wall while it moved on the other side. My headlamp was on the corridor floor. It stayed there for the rest of the summer as far as I know. I sat on that landing until the door quit, and then another 40 minutes because I couldn't make my legs do anything. And I came down with the water bottles still in the bag, and I lied about that too. I said I couldn't get through the plastic. Sonia looked at my hands, which were shaking bad enough that she could see it in the lantern light, and didn't say anything. And I have thought since that she knew and gave it to me anyway. The next afternoon I went up at 2:10, in the worst of the day. And the fourth floor was 100-and-something degrees, and it stank, and the people in it were barely moving at all. That's the trade the building offered me. I want to say it once, clearly, because everything I did after that came out of it. The fourth floor west was sealed in plastic with the power off, and no air moving, and glass on 2 sides. It baked. In the afternoon, it got so hot up there that the things on that floor slowed down to almost nothing standing, swaying, facing into the corners. In the afternoon, I could walk the north wall behind the stacked pad rolls, past 10 feet of them, and get to the vestibule and lie down on the carpet and talk to my father. And the same dead, sealed, 110-degree air was going straight through into 110 feet of glass tunnel with a 66-year-old man in it. The heat was the only reason I could reach him, and the heat was what was killing him. If I'd cut the plastic sheeting down and knocked out the east windows and gotten air moving through that floor, the bridge would have dropped 10 or 15 degrees by evening, and the fourth floor would have woken up and stayed awake, and I would never have crossed it again. There wasn't a version where he got both. I figured that out on Thursday, sitting on the floor at the gap with my cheek on the carpet, watching him try to unscrew the thermos lid and not manage it on the first 2 tries. "You're not sweating," I said. "It's not that hot." "Dad." "I've worked in hotter." He got the lid off. He drank about 1/3 of what I'd sent, which was too little, and he put the lid back on because that's what he did with everything. There's shade at the alcove after 2. I move up there, and I've got the shirt on the west glass. I'm going to get you some drapes. Some what? There's about 200 blackout panels in boxes out here, new ones, lined. They'll stop the sun cold. He thought about it. My father thought about things in a way you could watch happen. And that day, it was slower than it should have been. And I made myself sit there and watch it be slow. "Can't get a box through this," he said. "I'll fold them." "You'll fold them." That's the one thing I'm good at. Here's the thing about a blackout drapery panel. Folded flat and pressed down with your knee, it makes a packet about 4 inches thick. And the gap under that curtain was 6.5 inches on Thursday. And I got 2 through in 11 minutes. And my hands were scraped up to the wrist from the bottom bar of the curtain. And I had to leave because I could hear the corridor turning over behind me. By Saturday, he had the whole west side of the alcove covered and a panel laid over the 2 chairs to make a shade box. And the shirt was back on his back where it belonged. He hung them with the hotel's own drapery hooks, which were in the boxes, on a wire he pulled out of the fire extinguisher cabinet frame. That was his doing, not mine. I keep having to say that out loud to people, that he did most of it. He was not sitting in there waiting to be handed things. He rationed his own water past the point I'd told him to. He worked out a routine with the trash liners, and the second liner in the cabinet corner. And he kept that end of the bridge cleaner than some rooms I've stripped. He wrote on pillowcases in 3-inch letters, and hung them where the 6th floor landing could read them. And when Elaine started answering him with letters we made out of folded towels on the stair window, he wrote back, "Hi, teacher," because I'd told him what she used to do. The garage end never got any better. He told me about it in pieces, because he could tell I didn't want it. There was a strip of daylight under that curtain, a couple of inches of it, and things went past it. That's how he tracked time on that side, how many times the light broke. He said there'd been a woman out there the first morning calling the date, and by the second morning, she wasn't. On Thursday, somebody knocked on the garage curtain in a pattern, 3 and 2, and my father knocked it back, and they did it again, and he did it again. And then it stopped, and it never happened again in 11 days. He told me about that once and then wouldn't discuss it. And I understood that better than anything else that happened in that hotel. Downstairs, the 14 of us were becoming a thing with a shape. Sonia ran it, and she ran it the way she ran housekeeping, which is to say nobody voted her in and nobody argued. She had a clipboard with everybody's name and what they'd done that day, and she made sure everybody had something to do. And I watched her hand, a 70-year-old man, a stack of washcloths to sort by size purely so he'd have a reason to be awake. Her daughter was 26 and lived in Grafton, 40 miles off. And Sonia said her name exactly once in 11 days, and then stopped saying it and worked. Marisol kept the numbers. Water levels, candle count, batteries, the food out of the banquet kitchen's dry storage and the walk-in that was warming up, and the silhouette count on 4. She was the only one who thought to ask what the count meant. Teddy ran the buckets and got restless and started asking why we didn't do things. And the guests were guests, which is a job I'd watched people do for 11 years without ever thinking about it. There was Elaine. There was a man named Arnie Sackett, 60, who'd driven in for the wedding from 3 states over and whose truck was on level 4 of the garage with his dog crate and his tools in it, and who spent the first 2 days trying to get somebody to walk out to the garage street door with him, and the next 9 days being one of the most useful people in that basement. There was a mother and a 9-year-old boy from the wedding party, and the boy, Dev, turned out to be the one who figured out we could hear the Pell Street side better through the dock's roll-up door than through the stairwell. And he kept a listening schedule. And I mean, he kept it. Nobody was crazy. That's the part I'd want people to know if they only got one part. Nobody went wild-eyed, and nobody had to be talked down off anything. Everybody just got slowly more tired and more honest. Which is how we got to Thursday night and the meeting. It started because Marisol said the number out loud at dinner. Dinner was banquet rolls, cold, and a can of peaches split 14 ways. 19, she said. Yesterday it was 16. Today it's 19. Sonia put her cup down. On 4? West End. I counted twice. I counted the blue jacket both times, so I know I'm not double counting the same 3. I felt that in my chest and kept my face still. And I looked at Elaine, who was folding a towel that was already folded. "Where would they come from?" Arnie said. "Nothing's getting in the lobby. We chained the dock, the stair doors latch." "They come from the rest of the building," Sonia said. 3, 5, wherever else they are. They drift. Drift toward what? And nobody said the obvious thing, so I want credit for nothing here, because I didn't say it either. I'd been on that floor twice in 2 days. I'd dragged a bag through plastic sheeting. I'd hit the bottom bar of a steel curtain with a folded drapery panel maybe 40 times. On Wednesday night, I'd stood in a stairwell doorway with the light on my own face. They drifted toward the West End, because that's where the noise was, and I was the noise. Sonia said, "I want to talk about the bridge." She did it well. I'll give her that forever. She didn't come at me. She laid it out like a schedule change. She said Wes has made 4 trips up to the 4th floor in 3 days. She said every one of those trips means an unlatched door, a sound in a stairwell, and a man on a floor we've told everybody not to go near. She said we have one exit from this basement that we trust, and it is the east service stair, and the 4th floor sits on top of it. Then she said, "I want to stop the crossings." Elaine set the towel down. "That's a man up there. I know exactly what's up there. He's 10 minutes away. He's on the other side of 19 people," Sonia said. "And we don't have a way to bring him through them. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend a bottle of water twice a week is the same thing as a plan. That's the sentence that took the floor out from under me. Because she was right. And because she'd said it kindly. And because the answer to it was sitting behind a strip of blue painter's tape on the 4th floor, and only I knew it. Arnie made the other argument, and his was the one I couldn't get around. Then get him out, he said. I'm not being hard. I'm asking. If he's worth going up there for, he's worth going up there for all the way. Take 4 of us. Take the bell carts. Do it in the afternoon when Wes says they're slow, and get him out. And then we're done with the 4th floor forever. He looked around at everybody. What I can't sit with is doing it a little bit, over and over, for 11 days. That's the worst version. That's paying the price and not buying anything. Elaine said, yes. Just that. Teddy said, I'll go. And Sonia said, how, Wes? Everybody looked at me, and I had about 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds I could have said it. I could have said, there's a hand chain in that soffit. I cut the drywall open on the first morning with my own box cutter. The chain is right there. It takes 3 or 4 minutes of pulling. And the reason I didn't do it when that floor was empty is that I went downstairs to help you all instead. And then I sent 15 people up there. And one of them is standing in the doorway of 412 wearing a blue windbreaker. And Elaine, I need you to sit down. What I said was, it's a steel curtain. There's no way to lift it without power to the operator. And the contractor pulled that circuit at the panel and took the lockout with him. The hand chain's boxed in behind the new ceiling. If I had a reciprocating saw and an hour up there, maybe. I don't have an hour up there. Marisol said, there's a sawzall in the shop. There's no power for it. There's a battery one. The batteries are dead. I checked Tuesday. That part was true, and I put it out there like a man laying down a card he's been holding. The room went quiet. Sonia looked at me for a while, and I don't know to this day what she saw. We compromised, because that's what tired people do. 1 crossing every other day. 20 minutes maximum, 2 liters and whatever else fit. Nobody but me, because I was the only one who'd been through the plastic and knew where the pad rolls stood. Teddy argued and lost. Elaine didn't argue at all, which was worse. And I went along with it, and I nodded, and I went and lay down on my blanket stack in the laundry. And at some point that night, I decided I was going to break it. I'm not going to dress that up. I thought about the math the way a man thinks about math when he's already decided. Every other day, 2 liters in that heat, for a man who weighed 170 pounds and was already showing me a slow gray face at the gap. That was a schedule for how long it would take him to die, not a plan for keeping him alive. I could see that clearly. I still think I was right about it, and it doesn't matter that I was right about it. So on Friday, I built the decoy. It came out of the chute because everything I know comes out of the chute. Sound goes up that shaft. I'd heard the 6th floor girls talking her through it for 11 years. And the chute door on 4 sat at the east end of the floor, in the linen alcove by the service elevator, a good 140 feet from the bridge vestibule. If I stood in the basement chute room and hammered on the inside of that shaft with a mop handle, the whole shaft rang. If the chute door on 4 was open, that ringing came out onto the 4th floor at the east end. I tested it on Friday morning with Marisol watching me and not asking. And then I went up at 1 o'clock and opened the chute door on 4 and folded a housekeeping cart's canvas bag over the lip so the spring couldn't pull it shut. And I came back down and beat on that shaft for 2 minutes with a mop handle. And when I went up at 2:10, the west corridor had 9 people in it instead of 19, and the rest were at the far end, standing around a hole in the wall, making a sound I still hear in the shower sometimes. It worked. It worked 4 days running. I got him 6 liters on Friday and 8 on Saturday. I got him a folding stool out of the banquet closet in 2 pieces. I got 4 more drapery panels through, and a tube of the sunscreen out of the pool office, and a whole roll of trash liners, and a sleeve of graham crackers, and a laundry marker to replace the one that dried out. On Sunday, he wrote on the pillowcase, "Cooler today." And I read it from the 6th floor landing, with the sun going down orange on the courthouse dome. And Elaine stood next to me and said, There, you see." And I felt like a man who has gotten away with something, which is exactly what I was. The chute door on 4 stayed open the whole time because it took 30 seconds to unfold that canvas and set it right, and I did not have 30 seconds to spare. And because it worked, and because the rule about the chute was mine, and I understood the reason for it better than anybody, which is the specific way people talk themselves into things. The count went to 22. And on Sunday afternoon, Teddy Nunn went up to the 4th floor by himself. He told me that evening, in the chemical room, with the door shut, standing with his hands in his back pockets like a kid outside a principal's office. And he was proud of it and scared of it in equal parts. "You said the afternoon's the window," he said. "You said the north wall behind the pad rolls. You told me the whole thing." I had. On Friday, when he'd argued with me for an hour about coming along, I'd finally told him the route in detail because I was too tired to keep saying no. And because part of me wanted somebody in that building to know how it was done, in case I didn't come back down one day. I told myself it was a safety measure. It was me getting out of an argument. "What did you take him?" "2 bags of the pretzels, and that little cushion off the desk chair in the manager's office, 'cause you said he's on concrete." Teddy's chin went. It didn't fit. What didn't fit? The cushion. I had it in a duffel, and I was pushing it under, and it hung up on the metal, and I put my shoulder into it. I got down there in 9 minutes, and I didn't wait for the afternoon, and I didn't take the north wall, and I have no memory of crossing that corridor, and I have never once been able to reconstruct how I got there without being touched. The bottom bar of the curtain was resting almost on the floor. That roll of carpet pad, which had been holding 8 inches on Tuesday and 6.5 on Thursday, had been shoved sideways and out from under the worst of the load, and it had let the whole curtain down onto the crushed heel of itself. 3 inches, about the width of my hand, with my fingers flat. My father's face came down to it. He'd gotten so he could get onto the floor faster, which was one of the few things that had improved. He was all right, he said before anything else. The boy. He got out fine. He just about had a heart attack, but he got out. Dad. He's a good kid. He brought pretzels. He was trying to make it be nothing, and his voice had a scrape in it that wasn't from thirst. He pushed the green thermos toward the gap and turned it and tried it, and it didn't go, not on its side, not anyway, and he knew it wouldn't before he tried it. He set it back on the carpet. Bottles would go through flat if I squeezed the air out. Crackers would go through. Nothing with a shape would go through. Nothing folded thicker than my hand. And the man on the other side of it couldn't come out even if the whole 4th floor had been empty and singing hymns. I lay there on the carpet with my face on the floor and looked past his shoulder down 110 feet of glass with drapery panels hung on wire and a folding stool by the alcove and a pillowcase taped to the window. And above my head, 8 feet up, behind a 14-inch flap of drywall I'd cut on the first morning and stuck back with the contractor's blue tape, was a chain that would have opened that curtain in 4 minutes. The gap stayed at 3 inches for the rest of that day, and I stayed with it for most of the afternoon. Longer than the rule allowed. Longer than was safe. Pushing flattened water bottles through one at a time with the air squeezed out of them until my father told me to go. "You're breathing wrong," he said. "Go down. Come back tomorrow when it's hot." I went down the north wall behind the pad rolls and through the slit in the plastic and out the east stair. And I did not stop on the landing. And I remember thinking that everything from here was going to have to be the chain. I had it worked out by the time I hit the second floor. I'd need somebody to watch the corridor. I'd need 3 or 4 minutes of standing still 8 feet from that vestibule with a hoist chain clanking through a gearbox. I'd need the floor pulled off the west end, and pulled hard, and pulled for longer than a mop handle in a laundry chute could pull it. And I'd need to walk into the pool deck, where 13 people were sleeping on stacked banquet linen, and tell them that the panel I said was drywalled shut had been open since Tuesday morning because I opened it myself. I didn't do that. I went and lay down and thought about how to do it in a way that let me keep something. And while I was thinking about that, the chute did what I'd told everybody a chute does. It was a little after 11 at night. We'd moved our sleeping up to the pool deck 3 days before. No windows, 1 door, warm air, and the whole shallow end for washing. But we still kept the water operation in the laundry, because the tanks were down there, and you can't move 500 gallons. Marisol went down at 11 with Arnie to draw the night's jugs, which we did at night out of habit. And she was in the chute room with the lantern on the floor because that's where the valve was. I heard it from 2 floors up, through the shaft, before I heard the shouting. A long scraping rush, and then a heavy wet crack in the canvas bin, the exact sound of a full bundle coming down from 6. Nothing had come down that chute since Tuesday morning. Arnie got her out. Arnie Sackett was 60 years old, a man who had spent 2 days trying to get somebody to walk him to his truck. And he got a lantern, a folding table, and a woman with a broken forearm out of that room, and got the chute room door shut and held it. And when Teddy and I came down the east stair, he was leaning on it with his heels dug into the floor drain grating and his face gray, and he said, "There's a person in your laundry bin." We didn't open that door again. I want to be careful about the next part, because the next part is where everything I'd done quietly stopped being quiet. We couldn't seal the chute room. The door had no lock. It was a hollow core with a closer on it, and I'd been meaning to write it up for 2 years. We got the folding table across it, and a stack of full linen carts against the table, and it held that night. And by morning, we understood that the laundry was gone, and the tanks with it. 200 and something gallons of drinking water, on the other side of a door we couldn't trust. In a room with an open shaft in the ceiling that ran up 6 floors to a hole I had personally propped open with a canvas cart bag. Marisol's arm was splinted with a magazine and gauze from the pool office kit by 10 that morning. She was sitting on the edge of a stacked linen bed with her arm across her stomach when Sonia said the question to the room. "Those doors latch," Sonia said. I wrote the rule and Wes wrote the reason. So one of them was open. Nobody said anything. "It's the 4th floor," Sonia said. "It's got to be 4. It's the only floor that's got anything on it." Teddy looked at me. That kid could not have lied to save his life, and he looked right at me, and Marisol saw him do it. "Wes," she said. I told them about the chute. I told them the whole method, the mop handle on the shaft, the canvas bag folded over the lip. 4 days of it. 3, 6, 8 liters a day. I told them the count went from 19 to 22 while I was doing it, and that I had known what that meant and hadn't said it. Sonia didn't raise her voice. She never once raised her voice in 11 days. You broke the one rule you asked us for. Yes. And when we sat there Thursday and made you a schedule, you'd already decided. Yes. Elaine said, he was keeping a man alive. And Marisol said, with my water. And then she said, I'm sorry, to Elaine. And then to me, no, I'm not. That was the end of me being the man who knew things in that building. It came off me like a coat. And I let it happen and stood there and took it and still did not say the other thing. Because the chute could be explained by love and the chain could not. The weather broke that night. A front came through Monday around 2 in the morning, and it rained hard for an hour, and then settled into that gray, wet, 20 degrees cooler weather we get in July, when a system stalls over the river. Tuesday morning, the courthouse dome was in cloud. The pool deck felt almost cold. I went up the east stair at 11 in the morning out of pure habit, and I stopped at the landing below 4, and I could hear it through the door. The 4th floor was awake, all of it, all day, and it stayed awake. The heat was gone, and it took my crossing with it. I got flattened bottles through Monday morning, 4 of them, in a run I have no business having survived. After that, I did not touch that gap again. Tuesday afternoon, Elaine went up to the 6th floor west landing with the binoculars, because she had gone up every day at 4 o'clock for 8 days, and she was not going to stop. She came back down with her mouth held in a line and handed me the binoculars and said, "You'd better go look." There was a fresh pillowcase taped to the alcove glass. The letters were 3 inches high, the same as always, but they wandered off the line, and the last 2 ran together at the edge. "Tell Mom I got it fixed." My mother had been dead for 2 years and 4 months. Sonia was on the pool deck counting jugs when I came down. She had 1 jug and part of another, and 11 people to divide it among. And she looked up at whatever was on my face and set the jug down. "I need everybody," I said. I told them about the chain. I told them there was a hand chain in the housing above that curtain, that you reset a lever and you pull, and it takes 3 or 4 minutes, and it isn't skilled work. I told them the contractor had drywalled the housing in, and that on Tuesday morning I had cut a flap in that drywall with the box cutter in my back pocket and taped it shut with blue tape, and that it was still there. Marisol said, "You told us there was no access." "I know what I told you. On Thursday, to the whole room." "I know." Arnie said, "Why?" And I gave them the true half. I said that on that first morning, I had gotten the flap open and put my hand on the chain, and then I'd gone downstairs instead, because the lobby was full of people, and I could hear the garage deck through the gap. And I didn't want to open 110 feet of glass between that noise and my building. I said by 10:20 there were people on 4, and the window was gone, and that after that, the truth and the lie amounted to the same thing on the ground. So I told the one that didn't make me a man, who had walked away from his own father with the chain in his hand. I did not tell them the rest of it, not that day. Sonia stood there for maybe 15 seconds. "How much does that curtain weigh?" That's who she was. There was going to be an accounting, and she was going to have it. And it was going to happen after. We went at 4 o'clock, because there was no window anymore, and no reason to wait for one. And because the sky was going to be dark at 9, and we wanted daylight in the stairwells. The plan was ugly and simple. Everything in that building was on the west end, the vestibule, the curtain, the chain, and stair B, which came up out of the loading dock corridor and opened into the west corridor about 15 feet from the bridge doors. The 4th floor's other end, 140 feet east, had the elevator lobby, the linen alcove, and the east stairwell door, with the contractor's plastic partition strung across the corridor between the two halves. So we needed the whole floor to go east and stay east for 5 minutes. Teddy and Arnie took a housekeeping cart up the east stair to the 5th floor landing. Loaded. 40 pounds of wet linen, a case of banquet glassware, a fire extinguisher, and the folding table. The idea was to send it down the flight, so it landed against the 4th floor door and came apart. And then for the two of them to go up, cross the 6th floor east to west, and come down stair B behind us. Sonia and I went up stair B to the 4th floor landing, with a mop handle, a bell cart, and the box cutter. And we stood on that landing in the dark with our hands on the door lever and waited. I want to tell it plain from here. The crash came at 9 minutes past 4, and it was enormous. Glass and steel down a concrete stairwell sounds like a building coming apart. And it went on for 4 or 5 seconds. And then there was one long ring from the extinguisher rolling. I counted to 20 with my forehead against the door. Then Sonia opened it. The west corridor was empty. Down at the far end, the plastic sheeting was full of movement, a whole wall of it bellying and going gray with shapes behind it. And the sound they were making was pushed toward the east door. And the light through the west windows was that flat, wet, gray afternoon light with no shadows in it at all. Sonia put the bell cart across the corridor at the vestibule mouth and stood behind it with the mop handle. She's 5'2". I tore the tape off the flap and folded the drywall down, and it came away easier than it had any right to. And the chain was hanging there, exactly where I'd left it on the first morning. And there is no way to describe what it does to a man, to see a thing he could have used 6 days ago, hanging in the dark, being fine. I got the release reset. That took longer than it should have. 40 seconds of feeling around a mechanism I'd watched somebody else operate twice a year, and then I had the chain in both hands, and I pulled. It's a loop. You pull one side hand over hand, and the other side feeds up. It's a gearbox, so it's easy, and it's slow, and it is nothing but noise. Every pull it went ka-chunk, ka-chunk, steel on steel, and the curtain came up out of the floor in inches. At 2 feet I could see his shoes. He was already down on the carpet on his side, and he had the green thermos out in front of him like he was going to hand it to somebody at a window. And his face was wrong dry and dull and slack on one side, and his eyes went to me and didn't hold. "Dad, crawl, right now." He said something. I've never known what. It had the shape of a sentence. At 3 feet, Sonia said, "Wes," in a voice I hadn't heard her use. And I looked down the corridor, and the plastic had come off the studs at one corner, and then there were 3 of them through it and coming. And past them, the whole partition was going down slow like a tent. He couldn't crawl. That knee wouldn't fold under him, and he had no strength in his arms, and he got about a foot and stopped. I let go of the chain, and the curtain dropped 6 inches and stuck on its own gearbox brake. And I got flat on the floor and got both hands under his arms and pulled him under it. I skinned the whole length of his back on that bottom bar. I've never told him that either. He reached back for the thermos, 66 years old, half out of his head with heat. And he reached back into the gap for that thermos, and I hauled him out. And the curtain came down on it and rolled it flat on one side with a sound like a car door. Sonia swung the mop handle at the first one, and it went sideways into the wall and got back up. Arnie says he heard her shouting from the 6th floor. What I know is that she stood there over the 2 of us on the floor for 11 or 12 seconds. And then Teddy came down stair B behind us and got my father's belt, and I got his shoulders, and Sonia came backward through the door, swinging that handle like she was killing a snake. And we got the door shut, and Arnie fell on the lever with his whole weight, and his bad leg gave, and he sat down hard on the landing and started laughing, and it wasn't laughing. The curtain never came back down. The crushed roll of carpet pad had jammed in the guide track, and the whole assembly hung there about 2.5 feet off the floor, with the pad wedged in it. I didn't know it that day. I found out the next morning. We got him down to the pool deck. He weighed nothing. Marisol put her good hand on his chest and said his pulse was going like a bird's, and we soaked bath towels in the pool and packed him in them and kept doing it. And Dev, the 9-year-old, sat by his head and put a wet washcloth on his forehead every time the last one went warm, all night, without being told once. By midnight, he was talking. He told me the bus route he'd driven in 2009, all the stops, in order, and he told me twice, and he asked me where my mother had parked. Around 2 in the morning, he asked who I was, politely, the way you'd ask a nurse. Around dawn, he came part way back. He knew me. He knew we were in the hotel. He asked whether the bridge had gotten fixed, and I said yes. He does not remember the 11 days. Not the shirt on the glass, not the drapery panels on the wire, not the folding stool, not the tapping on the garage curtain, not a single pillowcase. He knows those things happened because we've told him. To him, it's a story about somebody else that other people are very upset about. The last part is quick, and I'll do it in order. Tuesday night, the bridge stood open at the hotel end. Wednesday, Arnie and I looked at the top of it from the 6th floor landing with the binoculars, and the light under the garage end curtain was broken all the way across. And by Wednesday afternoon, there were shapes standing at the alcove where my father had hung his drapes. The garage end went sometime Wednesday night. I'd like to be able to say why. 11 days of them leaning on it, and a curtain is only as good as what's holding the bottom of it. And I know that better than I know most things now. That gave the 4th floor 110 feet of covered walkway to a 5-level parking garage. Thursday morning, the count was past anything Marisol could count, and it wasn't a West Corridor problem anymore. It was in Stair B, and it was on 5. We left the Ashgrove Court on the 11th day, before it was light, out through the dock in Kessler Alley with 4 bell carts and every jug we could carry. 11 of us walking, and one of us on a rolling desk chair with a blanket over him, because the carts wouldn't take his weight. Sonia went first. Teddy pushed my father. Arnie walked on a splinted knee for 1.5 miles, and never said a word about it. We got to the water plant on the Corbin Road that afternoon, where there were 19 people already, and a man named Ostrander, who took one look at Sonia and handed her a clipboard, which I thought at the time was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. We're still there, more or less. I split my time between the plant and a place up the ridge. My father's with me. He gets around with a walker, and he tires by 2 in the afternoon, and his temperature runs strange. And there are whole days when he's exactly himself, sharp and boring and asking about tires. And then there are days when he asks me where my mother's got to. Marisol went east with a group in the fall. She said goodbye to everybody. She shook my hand and she said, "I hope he's worth it." And she meant it as a real thing, not as a knife. And I've thought about it about 400 times, and I still don't know how to answer a question like that. Now the thing I've been walking around. On that first morning, in the 20 minutes between the curtains coming down and me going back downstairs, the 4th floor was empty. I've said that. What I've never said in front of a group of people is what happened right after. When I came down into that lobby, there were 30-odd people in it and a glass wall on Pell Street and a man bleeding on the sofa. And somebody asked me where they should go. And I sent them up the west service stair to the 4th floor. I told them the rooms had no doors. I told them there was space. I held that stairwell door open with my back and counted them through. And I told the last few that the wedge was on the landing if they needed to prop it for the people behind them. 15 people, near enough. One of them was a man in a blue windbreaker with a hotel pen in the chest pocket who asked me if there was water up there. His name was Gordon Fisk. He'd been married 44 years to a retired 4th grade teacher who spent 8 days climbing to a 6th floor stair landing to read my father's pillowcases out loud to me, and who asked me almost every one of those days if I'd seen a man in a blue windbreaker. And every one of those days, I said no. I saw him on Thursday, standing in the doorway of 412. I saw him on Friday and on Saturday. On Sunday, he'd moved down the hall to the ice alcove, and I saw him from 11 feet away. And I went past him along the north wall with a bag of water bottles for my father. So it's not one thing. That's what I need people to understand on the days when I try to explain it and make a mess of it. It's that I filled a stairwell with people because it was the fastest way to get a lobby empty, and that I had my hand on a chain when that floor was still quiet and let go of it because the noise on the garage side scared me, and because being useful downstairs felt more like being a good man than pulling a chain for my own father. And that when both of those turned out to be the same mistake, wearing 2 coats, I put a strip of blue tape over it and let a woman go on hoping for 8 days, because telling her would have meant telling all of it. Every time somebody in that basement said, "We should get him out," and I said there's no access, I was protecting the first morning. Not my father, not the group. The first morning. I told Elaine in October. We were shelling beans on the loading side of the plant, and I told her all of it, in order. And I didn't leave the part about 412 for last to soften it. I put it where it belonged, in the middle. She didn't shout. She set the bowl down and went and walked out to the fence line and stood there about half an hour. And when she came back, she picked the bowl up and finished the beans and said, "You should have told me on the second day. I'd have gone up there myself and I'd have been killed. And that would have been mine to do." She still comes Sundays. She sits with my father for an hour and reads to him out of whatever's around. And he loves it and calls her teacher because that's what he wrote on a pillowcase. Once in a building neither one of them can go back to. She's kind to him, and she's finished with me. And both of those are permanent. And she does them in the same room at the same time. And I sit out on the step while she does. The thermos is on the shelf over the sink. It's flat down one side where that curtain came onto it, so it won't stand up on its own. It leans against the sugar tin. The lid still seals, which is a hell of a thing. I fill it at 6:15 most mornings, because that's when he used to text me that he was leaving, and I set it by his chair for when he gets up. Some mornings he says thanks like I'm his son, and some mornings he says thanks the way you'd thank a man at a counter. And I've got no way of knowing which one it'll be until he says it. So I fill it and I put the lid on, and I go outside and get started.